Welcome back to Graveyard Keeper. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to get the episode out, but it's here now, so you can stop worrying and just enjoy the episode. Thanks to this comment from last video, I spent a while figuring out how to use the teleportation stone, which was incredibly useful, so thanks for the comment. I got right back into the flow of the game by doing one of the most graveyard keepery things I've ever done, which is burying a corpse. This is when I realised I left my graveyard with a quality of -5. It took all my mental strength not to close the game right then and there. I wanted to start off easy, so I decided to catch 5 silver starfish for the Gypsy Baron. So it's time for a lad's fishing trip, by myself. The fishing game reminded me of the Stardew Valley fishing game, but a little easier. However, despite being a pro virtual fisherman, I didn't catch a single silver quality fish, so I just went back to my normal chores of burying bodies, and I also unlocked the alchemy storage. Luckily, after doing my first sermon back, I got 3 faith. It's not as much as I wanted, but it's definitely a good start. On day 55, I gave all my faith to Snake so we could become friends, and he gave me instructions that I had to study, but I needed even more faith to do this, so I had to wait an entire week until I could continue Snake's storyline. The problem was that I had a lot of quests, and all of the quests were a bit intertwined with each other. I needed to finish one so I could get the materials to finish the other, so that then I could move on to finish the third one, and they were all linked in that way, and it was very confusing. But I just needed to start making progress somewhere. I started by making a few decorations and bringing the graveyard quality up to 5, which was actually a pretty decent improvement, but it was nowhere near what it needed to be. On day 58, I also built a stone garden where I could meditate, but I didn't really get the point of using it because it regenerated less stamina than sleeping in a bed did. So if anyone knows what the point of the stone garden is, please let me know in the comments below, because I would like to know what I spent a lot of time building. I then put my farmer's hat on and started planting carrots, cabbages and beets, which actually made me feel like Dwight Schrute from The Office a little bit. Maybe that's not a good thing. I started firing conical flasks in my furnace because it gave me blue points and was the only way to get blue points that I knew of so far. It was at this point in the game I had a 1 million IQ realization. I was gifted with insight. In most games with skill trees, there are certain skills that I just would never ever pick. But in Graveyard Keeper, you need to have certain skills that would otherwise normally be useless, such as conical flask making, right? In this game, it's a vital skill, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get blue points, which I need to progress the game. In this way, the game actually forces us to explore many more options that we normally wouldn't, which actually makes this game something quite new and refreshing. But then Sunday arrived and I had to stop being a philosopher and had to give a sermon. The sermon on day 60 attracted a lot more people than normal, but that was because I had built another church bench and I actually got 4 faith instead of 3, which was a very nice upgrade. Later I unlocked the Glass Blower 2 tech, so I could now make fancy conical flasks, which I actually did end up needing later in the game. Next I upgraded my second furnace and used it to make some fancy conical flasks which I had just unlocked. These would give me some blue points that obviously I always needed, and it would also be very useful in the future for when I did some alchemy stuff. I harvested crops and replanted crops and had a perfect autopsy on a corpse, leaving it with only white skulls. I mean, that just shows you how good I am at the game. It really does. With the new faith from the sermon I had just done, I researched the Keeper's Key and was now ready for Snake's return. I was in the middle of doing some alchemy stuff when a corpse arrived, and I don't know if it was me or if it was the corpse or if it was a joint effort, but it was such a bad quality corpse that it brought my graveyard quality all the way down to 4, which was not good. After that, I could finally get back to my alchemy station and researched health powder, but this is when my next disaster struck. Right, I must confess, this disaster was not the game's fault, actually. It was completely my own. I got distracted on my phone, and instead of pausing the game to pause the time, I left it open for some reason. I don't know why, I don't know how, it was, I don't know what happened. But basically, I completely missed the day Snake arrived, and once I'd realised the mistake I'd made, Snake was already gone again, which meant I had to wait an entire week to give him the key, which was fine. I mean, I could survive. It's only gonna be like an hour of my life gone in the toilet, but that's okay because I have nothing else to do. Oh, I feel myself getting older playing this game already. Oh my goodness. I powered through and continued with some other vital jobs that needed doing, like harvesting and then replanting crops on the morning of day 64. But seriously, I realised at this point I actually needed to start doing some serious stuff to actually progress in the game, because otherwise this whole series, this whole episode would just become me missing important events and replanting crops. I built a crate facility which required me to undergo 2 building procedures, right? This was quite exciting in a roundabout kind of a way. Because I used more energy and had to do 2 building procedures, it meant that the game was getting harder, which also meant I was progressing. So if you think about it like that, it's actually a good thing. Once I'd finished the crate facility, I looked through the crate options to see what I could make, and saw that I could make a crate full of bowls and thought, well, that's going to be really easy. Let me just do that. So I made something like 12 bowls, hoping that would be enough. But it actually turns out I needed 200. So because I didn't have 5 years of my life to waste making bowls in a virtual game, I had to do something else. So instead, I decided to focus on making some ink, which I could then use to make some flyers, which I could then give to the Inquisitor. This was one of his quest items that he requested. Apparently he wanted me to make flyers so that he could advertise the witch burning. This was all in the last episode, go check it out if you haven't already. Anyway, back to this episode. The first step was buying oil from Dig, which I could then mix with black paint to make some ink. And on my way home, I bought Jerry some red wine because I'm just that good of a friend. Once I arrived back home, I mixed the oil with some ash that I'd gotten from the funeral pyre and got some black paint. The black paint, combined with some of my new fancy conical flasks and a little bit of water, gave me some ink. I then quickly had to interrupt my progress to perform a sermon that got me another 4th faith and a little bit of bronze. Now getting back to the exciting stuff, the ink. God, that's tough to make that sound exciting. I wanted to make an ink and quill, but I had to wait a week to get feathers from the astrologer, who only arrived on blue moon days. Jerry was also very picky about his wine, and the one I bought him wasn't high enough quality, so I went out and bought him some Silver Star quality wine, hoping that was good enough. When I was talking to a woman called Rose, I accidentally pressed the vampire dialogue option, which is a storyline I wanted to pursue later. But nevertheless, I got a long story that basically boils down to that she was attacked by a vampire in the barn, but he spat her blood out because it was absolutely disgusting. I can't tell if that's a good or a bad thing, to be honest, but oh well. After drinking the wine that was finally good enough, Jerry said I should dig up some cognac for him, which was between the village and the lighthouse. I thought this was a simple job, so I got right to it and started digging. After a few instances of digging up random things, I unearthed an archaeological machine. Jerry appeared and informed me that the last graveyard keeper used it to see into the past, and that it was a valuable treasure. But as I was about to excavate this machine, a villager found me and said I couldn't have the machine because I didn't own the land it was found on. I tried to bribe my way out of the situation, but before I could even give him a figure, the villager said I was too poor to bribe him. I mean, that was a low blow, it really was. To get past this problem, Jerry came up with a great idea. I was going to buy the land and build a tavern on top, so I could do secret archaeological stuff in the cellar and earn some money at the same time. I mean, this sounded like quite a good plan to me. I went to Roderick to buy the land, and apparently it was going to cost me 10 gold, which was an absolutely outrageous price, especially for someone as poor as me, according to, the entire village. However, I instead bought the land in Doug's name because apparently, as an old villager, he got certain tax reductions that lowered the price all the way down to 30 silver, which was a lot more bearable. Whilst I was in the tavern, I met a woman called Miss Charm. She is apparently some sort of singer or entertainer, and quite popular amongst the townfolk, but she didn't think I was worth talking to. As I was on my way out to leave, and probably on my way to go and cry by myself because of the rejection, I was stopped by the poet, who asked for some ink and paper, both of which I had back at home, but not on me. However, that was very much a second priority. The first was figuring out how I was actually going to build a tavern on the land I had just bought. So I went to speak to the only person I could think of asking. Roderick was terrified at the idea of competition, but I told him I wasn't actually planning on opening a tavern. So he told me to talk to Corey the engineer, who could help me with my theoretical question of building a tavern. The next day I gave the poet his paper and ink, and after that I had the option to trade one wine for a story, which wasn't actually a terrible deal. But since I already had a ton of stories back home, I didn't need one currently. So for now, this deal was a little bit useless, but always good to have. I finished the day by buying a ton of seeds and completing a massive garden expansion. On day 69, very funny, I gave Snake the key and he unlocked the final door in the cellar. I then went straight into the side room to get the diary for the astrologer, but needless to say, it didn't go as planned. I made my way back down into the cellar, and as soon as Snake saw that I was immortal, he loved me. He told me I was the perfect candidate to explore the dungeons and clear them out for him. But instead, I decided to leave that for a later time and instead explore the newly opened up area. In a separate room, I met a zombie who was chained to the wall, and he was called Gunter. Gunter told me all about making zombies and how I could automate work by using them, which basically sounded like slavery in disguise. I retrieved the diary and explored the dungeon where I killed a few green slimes, which seemed to be the generic low-level enemy for these types of games, but hey, I'm not complaining. Once I made it out the dungeon alive, I unlocked zombie resurrection and zombie logistics, which would allow me to create my very own zombie army of army of forced no, can't say that. Army of exploitate, no, definitely not that. Army of volunteers. An army of volunteers. I could create my own army of volunteers. How about that? That's safe to say. As I was debating the ethics of this army, a corpse arrived that I thought would be my first volunteer, but I needed 10 faith to bring him back to life, and currently I couldn't afford to do that. Luckily, Gunter had told me the location of a volunteer waiting to help, so I dug him up and then built a massive sawmill so he could start working. Volunteering, maybe. Oh, look at him go. Isn't he just incredibly slow? Yes, he was definitely not overworking himself, but at least he was working. The next day, I gave the astrologer the diary that I'd found in the dungeon, and he started talking to me about building some machine to activate the portal, and it was a lot of stuff that I didn't really read through. But to give you the short version, I basically have to build a thing called an emitter and a barrel. The emitter was supposedly made up of 3 items that were quote-unquote the soul of the town, but he couldn't read the pages about the barrel and how to make it, because apparently they were stuck together. He said he would need some acid from me to help get them unstuck, so that was a quest added to the quest book. I got back home and made notes that I made into chapters that I made into a prayer of faith that would hopefully increase the amount of faith I got during a sermon, so I could then make more zombies. The day ended with me making a massive wood train from the zombie to back home, which looked amazing. On day 72, I met the woodcutter, who was very far up north in the forest, and apparently he wanted me to bring him an axe because he had lost or broken his own. This means for the last 72 days, at least, that the woodcutter hasn't been cutting wood, which seems to be his main gig, if you ask me. It made me wonder for how long he would have done nothing had I not given him the axe. Would he remain a woodless woodcutter for his entire career? Well, it was exactly these kind of deep questions that I spoke about during my sermon, but it seems people just weren't as philosophically gifted as I was, since the sermon was a massive flop, and I got 2 faith despite an improved prayer. After that disappointment of a sermon, I spent the rest of the day taking my anger out on slimes in the dungeon. I emerged from the dungeon barely alive, but whilst I was down there, I had retrieved a health potion. So I made my way to the swamp to deliver the health potion to the witch, and once she was healed, she taught me how to make spices for the merchant. These spices were apparently going to solve his tasting problem and bring him back to full health. She also gave me a ton of new powders that I could use for alchemy, but at this point I didn't know what any of them did. The next day I went into town to make some money. So I sold some death certificates to Herodric and sold a bunch of green stuff to the stable hand, which both got me a decent amount of money. Whilst I was in the area, I also delivered the axe to the woodcutter and was rewarded with the worst thing imaginable: vegan recipes. I was given vegan recipes for lasagna and spaghetti, which is absolutely disgusting, and I will never ever use these ever. The rage and anger that these vegan recipes brought up within me was released in the dungeon, where I spent basically the rest of the day absolutely obliterating slimes and bats. After I emerged, my health and stamina was incredibly low, so I decided to give the stone garden another go, hoping that it would somehow be useful. However, just like before, it did the exact same thing a bed did, but just worse, and took a lot longer. So I still couldn't figure out the point of this whole thing. On day 75, I went along to watch the witch burning, and met with the Inquisitor. I gave him the flyers I had made him to promote the witch burning, but it seems nothing can make this guy happy. The Inquisitor complained because apparently the guards needed more motivation to find the witches, so he tasked me with getting some wine, which would apparently motivate the soldiers to look harder. In order to do this, the Inquisitor gave me permission to grow grapes on the west side of Witch Hill, which was conveniently very close to my house. I was actually looking forward to making some wine because I thought I could sell it for quite a big profit. I also got an insight into the Inquisitor's backstory, since apparently he owned part of Witch Hill, and it is where his family used to live, before an event called the Great Blast killed his wife and child. I mean, the only Great Blast I know of is the one in the bathroom after I've eaten Taco Bell, but that's besides the point. Anyway, getting back to the game. I went and ventured into the 3rd level of the dungeon. The 3rd level of the dungeon was the main site of an absolute massacre, where hundreds of slimes, bats, and whatever these are, died at my hands. It was an intense battle that sadly ended with my defeat at the hands of a green slime, which is probably the most embarrassing thing I've had to admit to. Once my immortality kicked in, I built a bookshelf in the cellar of the church to store all the loot I got from the dungeon. Then I had an argument with Jerry, who was annoyed that I was helping the Inquisitor, and I'm not sure exactly what I told him, but the beef was squashed very quickly, which then left me with the rest of the day to build candelabras in the church to raise the church score. Day 78 was a sermon day, which meant that I was going to progress in the game. The sermon went a lot better than the last one, and I got 6 faith and 1 silver. Then I went and opened up a passage to Witch Hill from behind my house. This was the area the Inquisitor gave me to grow grapes, and so that's what I did. I planted my single grape. Now, I had somewhat forgotten about the zombie that was meant to be chopping wood, and when I checked on him, I realised that he had done a great job at chopping, but the logs weren't moving. So I fired the zombie as a chopper, and instead hired him again as a courier, so he would now drag the logs down to my house. This was great because I was dreading another log train, to be honest. It was then time for me to face my demons. I was going to head back into level 3 of the dungeon where I had died last time, but this time things turned out differently. I decimated the slimes and bats without a second thought and cleared the level within no time at all. It was now day 80, and I started off with some simple harvesting and then replanting of crops, which actually took a surprisingly long time. I realised it was the day when the merchant would visit town, so I rushed over, hoping I hadn't missed him. Luckily I made it just in time to hand over the spices, and they worked perfectly. In fact, the merchant was so mesmerised by the spices that he gave me the job of making 5 gold quality dinners that he would have served at the palace for the royals to eat. The merchant seemed excited and maybe a bit nervous about the idea of feeding the royals, but I didn't really care since I never met them, and quite frankly, I was from a different world. My last sermon had been a great success, but I still didn't have enough faith to resurrect a zombie, so I was patiently waiting for the sermon day to come back around. But I decided I should go and check on the refugees to the north and see if I could help them out in any way. There were a few things I could do, like building tents and wells and other vital infrastructure, but I didn't have silk, so I couldn't do any of these things. Therefore, the refugees sadly went without tents or water. I spent day 82 doing a single thing, which was making a ton of nails. I used all these nails to make a crate of supplies that I then delivered to my shop in the town. I put it down on the pallet and didn't know what to do from there, but I assumed it would just sell itself. The next day, I built a ton of graveyard fences because I wanted to get the graveyard quality up since it was currently abysmal. I also harvested some crops and got the Master Gatherer feat, which made me a master at gathering. Now finally a sermon day rolled around, and after extracting 6 faith from the followers of my church, I wanted to resurrect a corpse. I thought I could resurrect one that I had previously buried, but it turns out this wasn't really an option. So I wasted quite a lot of time and money buying exhumation licenses and digging up and then reburying a few corpses in my graveyard. Despite this, my luck didn't seem to be totally against me, since Donkey delivered a fresh corpse pretty soon after all that messing around. I resurrected the zombie and brought him all the way to the north. Now, I actually had a good reason for dragging the zombie halfway across the map, because in the north there was an iron and a coal mine where I wanted to put the zombie to work. I built the porter station, iron storage pallet, and the iron mine itself, and put the zombie to work straight away. Now luckily for us, we couldn't see the working conditions in that mine, but if we could, I have no doubt that this video would be taken down. My next task was scrounging together 50 silver so Corey the engineer could build me a tavern. I did this by selling death certificates and all of my crops, which did get me more than 50 silver. So I finally went to Corey and commissioned a tavern to be built right above the ancient machine. On my way home I decided to check the shop, where I sold crates, to see if I had made any money, and it turns out this was probably the most profitable thing to do in the game. I sold a single crate of nails for 15 silver, so I rushed straight back home and made a second one, which I put up for sale as quickly as possible. The next day my tavern was already finished. Corey really put in a shift and this place was looking really nice already. I explored the cellar of the tavern and unlocked the brewing tech with which I could make beer. The next step to getting this place up and running was to build a bartender. And yes, you heard me correctly, I said build. Once I made this wooden figure and put him behind the bar, Jerry summoned Yorick the ghost, who possessed the figure and started working. This was great. I didn't have to pay the staff insurance or wages, and Yorick said he never needed to take holidays or a break. This was just another division of my army of volunteers. Next, I got down to the reason I created this whole establishment in the first place, which was the ancient machine. I broke down the wall and gained access to this orb-looking thing, which still housed the skeleton of the last inventor. Jerry explained that by inserting certain artifacts, I would be able to view the past and gain vital knowledge. He also warned I had to insert these artifacts in a specific order, and the first artifact was a statuette of the ancient god that Herodric apparently had. The next day I had to take a break from my enterprise in order to speak to the peasants at the church, which gave me another 6 faith and some coins. I had enough faith to bring back to life another zombie, which I put straight to work in the mines without any health and safety equipment whatsoever. At this point, I reached day 90. This meant I only had 10 more days to complete a ton of stuff, so I got straight back to work. I built a brewing stand in the cellar beneath the house, but I needed hops to brew beer, of which I had none at all. I had a few hop seeds from the dungeon, so I brought a ton more seeds from the farmer and spent the entire day doing a ton of farming. I used the word ton a lot there, didn't I? I then focused on the tavern again and thought to myself, since I didn't have beer to sell, the least I could do was make it a comfortable place to hang out. So I built some tables and chairs. And another stand in the cellar, by the way. After browsing the skill tree for a little bit, I decided to get the digestion tech. I then built a fermentation barrel to make wine, but unfortunately, I didn't have enough grapes, so I was left stumped for wine. I decided to focus on the ancient machine and collecting the artifacts required, since this seemed to be a task I could complete right away. And I was right. Once I had spoken to Horodric, he explained that his wife Miss Chains had the statuette. When I spoke to Miss Chains, she said she didn't trust Horodric and wanted me to investigate whether or not he cheated on her. Long story short, I had to talk to a few NPCs around the village and ultimately concluded that Horodric wasn't cheating, and once I told Miss Chain, I got the artifact. On my way out, I also might have engaged in what some might call underhanded sales tactics, and I bought some of Horodric's beer, which I then went and sold at my own tavern. I probably didn't make any money from doing this, but I enjoyed getting use out of the tavern either way. Once I inserted the artifact, I had to read through some Star Wars style credits that explained that hundreds of years ago, the old gods created the people of the town, and the old god chose 3 women to be his priests and to serve him. The people were mostly happy and life was good. Then the credits finished and I got a vision. I saw what I first thought was a soldier speaking to one of the old god's priestesses about how they were in love, but they were both talking about the old god and the priestess's role and her servitude to him and all this kind of stuff, and they basically concluded that they couldn't be together. The soldier then got very, very angry and stormed off. The vision then revealed that the soldier was in fact Horodric and the priestess was Miss Chains. This brought up more questions than answers, but if I had any hope of understanding the situation, I had to find more artifacts. But before I did that, I built a display case and displayed the ancient statuette for the whole tavern to admire. I also concluded the day with some farming, which was a great stress reliever. Day 94 was mostly uneventful, since I basically sorted out some zombie stuff, which I then followed up by burying a body that had basically decomposed on the floor of my mortuary. Now day 95 was much more interesting. I performed a sermon that got me another 6 faith and some coins, and I thought that I could resurrect a corpse that was already buried. So I painstakingly dug it up just so I could rebury them once I realised I had to wait for a fresh corpse. As I'm doing the voiceover for this episode, I realised 2 things. One was that I actually already made the mistake of doing this before in the episode, so I'm sorry you had to watch that twice. I promise I won't make that mistake again. And the second thing I realised is that you should like the video. You definitely should. I think it's a very good thing for you to do. I would approve of you doing that. Thank you very much. Whilst I was waiting for the donkey to deliver a fresh corpse so I could reanimate it, I went to the 4th level of the dungeon, and needless to say, I got absolutely bullied. I barely made it out alive that time and didn't manage to complete the level. Over the next 2 days I resurrected another corpse and brought it back to the mines, where I extended the mine and made another iron ore stockpile. This place was now fully set up to make sure I never ran out of iron. I then used the rest of the day to venture into the town and promote my business, using some flyers I had made earlier. Whilst I was there, I sold Horodric my death certificates before buying most of his beer supply, which I then just sold at my own tavern that now seemed to be moderately busy, which was rather exciting. On day 98 I made tons of nails that I then used to make a crate of resources, which I then went to sell at my business. I was becoming a true capitalist. I was feeling good at this point, so I went back into the 4th level of the dungeon and got some bloody nails from defeating an enemy. I left the dungeon once I got those nails because I knew they were a quest item for Snake. Snake used the bloody nails and a bucket of blood to perform an evil ritual that he claimed would summon destruction upon the town. But I think something went wrong, since he only managed to summon a chicken. Snake said he used the wrong spell and wanted me to retrieve a spell book called the Necronomicon from the astrologer. But to do this, I had to wait a few days, so I left Snake on hold for a bit. Once again, I started my pursuit of artifacts, and Jerry had given me a tip-off about where I might find the next one. I confronted the farmer's son about the wine flask he carried around with him. This got him very worried because he knew his dad wouldn't approve of him doing that. So I promised not to snitch on him, and in exchange he gave me the flask, which meant I had secured the second artifact. On my way to the tavern, I dug up a second artifact, the ancient door hinge, which was oozing with magical power. The visions I got from these artifacts were both very interesting. The first was a vision of the 3 priestesses answering the questions of the townsfolk. We saw Miss Chains again, and the other 2 priestesses, who as of yet hadn't been identified. One of the unidentified priestesses suddenly collapsed on the floor, and when she woke up, she claimed she had received a vision from the old god himself. The priestess turned out to be Clotho, who we know as the witch from the swamp, who gave us the spices to help the merchants and who needed the health potion. This was very interesting. It seemed that the characters we met in the current day are all either extremely old or they are continually resurrected after they die. The second vision I saw was one of Dig being confronted by the second priestess Clotho. In this vision, Dig is referred to as Diggus and seems to be an important person who was in a leadership position of some sort. Clotho goes to explain that she had a vision of destruction and that she needed Diggus's key to unlock the ancient portal to save everyone. However, Diggus was very dismissive of these claims and decided he wouldn't give her the key since he didn't believe these prophecies of destruction. Clotho then left in a fit of rage, which is where the vision ended. One vital piece of information that we learned at some point in the vision is that Herodric is in fact Diggus's adopted son, which is a secret I couldn't make heads or tails of at the moment. I wanted to see more visions, so I needed to collect more artifacts. The next artifact was in the farmer's house, but he said I was only allowed inside if I could grow a carrot the size of a log. The only way I could think of doing this was with a little bit of magic, so I went to the swamp to talk to the witch. I took a pumpkin as a gift for her, which she seemed to like, and she said enlarging a carrot would be easy enough, but I had to do something for her first. She wanted me to convince Corey, the engineer, to go out with her on a date, after which she would happily enlarge my carrot. Don't laugh, that's not meant to be a joke. I was hoping that convincing Corey to go on a date with an old witch wasn't going to be as hard as I thought it would be, but unfortunately I was wrong. And I had no idea what to do next. I was completely lost. So I went back to my farm, lit up a corpse and cremated it, and as I basked in the orange glow of the fire, I thought back over my last 100 days. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I'd probably suggest that you go off now and watch an actually good YouTuber. So off you go. Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good day. Thank you very much. Bye.